All right, guys, we're out here on one of the most famous trout streams in all of the United States, maybe in the world. And we're here with Mike Duncan, our fisheries manager for here in Region 3, or is it?
Yeah, Region 3. Yep.
Yeah. So today we're gonna do a fun float. It's the late part of August. Hopefully pick up some fish on hopper droppers, maybe some streamers. Mike's gonna be fishing first, and we're gonna talk about all sorts of stuff that he's working on here in Montana, including, I don't know, what are some of the things we're gonna talk about?
Yeah, just a continuation from the podcast. I think we still had some stuff we couldn't touch on then, but talk about the upcoming studies we've got on the Big Hole in Madison. We got the management plan coming out, just use in general in this part of the world, and some of the we'll appease Marcus and maybe hit on some of the native species stuff we got going in the basin. So there's plenty to talk about that we weren't able to touch on a couple of weeks ago. So I figured we could get out here and spend a little time. Yeah,
sweet. Well, it's me, Mike, and Marcus, but we're gonna drop the boat in, row down the river, and have us a good time. So let's do it. Hey, my mom's calling me. Gotta answer this real quick. Hey, Mom. You there? Hello? Hello? Hello?
I totally get the optics of me fishing and talking about the Madison.
Yeah.
Be clear, don't call my office. I'm not on the clock right now. I'm using vacation time. But at the same time, I think it's a good opportunity to continue that discussion we had a couple weeks ago and talk a little bit more about the work we've got coming down the pipeline in a few years on the Big Hole, Beaverhead, Madison. We've had some pretty substantial declines on some of the rivers in southwest Montana, namely the Big Hole, Beaverhead, parts of the Ruby, and it's not something that happened overnight. Since things peaked about 10 years ago after the big runoff, good water year we had. Oh, there's a little one.
Move one.
We had a really good water year in 2011. Good snowpack, nice wet spring, pretty good summer like we did this year. And most every one of the rivers in this part of the world had really high abundances a year or two later because of the cohort of fish that came from that spring. But since then, a lot of our rivers, we've been through some drought, some pretty warm summers, and the fisheries in some of those areas are starting to suffer, and we're at or near historical lows in some of those rivers, the Big Hole, Beaverhead. The lower Madison's been pretty rough shape, although it's kind of leveled out. It's not declining as much as it has been, or like some of the other rivers. And so in response to those declines and some concerns from the public about some fish health issues that have popped up in recent years on those rivers over around Dillon, with some lesions and some other minor outbreaks with saproligny and some fungus. We've started working with Montana State and some of the professors over there on a couple multi-year studies on those four rivers that'll look at adult mortality, where we'll tag just about every fish we can get our hands on during our long-term efforts, and then maybe some other sampling. Track those fish through time, through either reports from anglers that call into a dedicated number, creel surveys, and then our sampling efforts, and try to start to compartmentalize mortality on these rivers. What's responsible for the declines we're seeing? Water's the major player, we get that. We'd like some more details on exactly how it's affecting recruitment of younger fish and adult survival. But when we have water, we usually have pretty good fisheries, and that's one thing we usually have in the Madison because of Hebgen Dam upstream of here. The Madison's almost always flush with water. We work with Northwestern; they're great partners on working on how to manage flows in the Madison. And so in this stretch of river in particular, you usually have plenty of water and it's usually fairly cool. And so because of that, we have a fairly stable fishery, especially relative to the other rivers in this part. Once you get down in the lower below Ennis Lake, we struggle with chronically high water temperatures down there, where even on a fairly mild summer like this, it's pushing 80 degrees at times, which at that point you're starting to move into a warm water fishery at that point. So we want to have a better understanding of how water is factoring into things. This fish health component, what's causing these lesions that we're seeing on a handful of fish over in the Big Hole Beaverhead. We don't see it when we're sampling in the spring or fall, but we're getting calls from the public about a fish here, a fish there, and it's most often browns, adult browns, but we don't know what's causing it, and we don't know what kind of effect it's having on the population. And we're at such low abundances in some of these rivers, it might be contributing more than it used to in the past. We just don't know. And so this mortality study will help provide a little more insight into that, potential effects of catch and release mortality and angling in general. So it'll allow us to start to put each one of these factors into boxes and get a better understanding of how they're each influencing the fishery, and then we can use that to inform management decisions, how we work on habitat restoration, work with water users, potential angling regulations, that kind of thing. There's also going to be a juvenile component. In most of our rivers, that year, that recruitment really sets the stage for the next couple of years based on that year class. So when you've got a year like a 2011 or hopefully this year, we had a really good runoff, nice, cool, wet summer for the most part. So hoping that this year turns out to be give us a little bit of a reset on a lot of these rivers, and give us a little bump in abundances. But we want to know where the important recruitment areas are in these rivers, what tributaries are most contributing to the main stem populations. There's a lot of spawning that goes on in the main stem, but we also know that fish like to use these tributaries, but to what level are they helping shore up the fishery? So there'll be that juvenile component. We also have a rec study coming on board where the recreation division, or the recreation staff, I should say, are going to be better characterizing use on these rivers. Rivers like the Madison, Big Hole, Beaverhead, we have a fairly good idea of how anglers are out here fishing, using the river. What we don't know are what amount of use is coming from recreational floaters. Like this weekend I went over to the Yellowstone and floated with my wife and kids. We didn't take the rods with us, but we don't check that box when we're out doing our statewide angling surveys. So we don't know what amount of use is there. Tubers on the lower Madison, that draws a lot of attention. And those people are affecting, the FASs, the boat ramps that we just put on. So we want to make sure we've got a good idea of how they're affecting that infrastructure, the overall experience for everybody on the river, and get a better idea of how we can manage that. So all three of those studies will be 3 to 4 year projects, PhD students at MSU, and we'll be kind of lockstep together throughout the process, working with the similar people over at MSU. And it's not going to be, one question we've got are, well, we're just going to continue to let things roll for the next 4 or 5 years. The timeline to finish those projects is 4 or 5 years, but we'll be learning as we go.
Yeah.
We'll be getting annual reports from the graduate students and learning and potentially be able to address issues before those projects are over. So those are the ones we have lined up. Kind of the fourth prong is the fish health aspect, taking a fresh look about how we sample for sick and dying fish. Are there things we can do better to help answer that question? And that'll be rolled in to that mortality study to some degree to help get an idea of how that's contributing to things. So those will start in the spring of 2024. MSU's already got the positions advertised. And hopefully we'll have some graduate students lined up here in the next couple of weeks and get started this fall or winter on the planning part of things. Go. One on the board.
The smallest fish in the Madison River. Future stud.
Yes. They got to start somewhere.
Trout, yeah.
Got to start somewhere.
Meat eater. Got that, bud?
Oh yeah.
So that fish was that fish born this year? Like,
no, that would have been from last year.
Gotcha.
So he's 1.5 years.
The ones that were hatched this, I guess, in the spring, is that when they
Yep.
a brown's egg would? They're tiny.
Yeah, a couple inches. They're getting big enough to where with the naked eye you can tell what they are, but considerably smaller than that one.
Gotcha.
And so that's part of the reason it takes us a little while to detect some of those changes, whether it's with the dam or any other kind of environmental variable. That we really don't start picking up fish in our sampling until they're about 6-7 inches. And that's just the efficiency of the electrofishing that we do out here. And
Gotcha.
So it's usually not, we sample in the fall up here, so we'll start picking up those fish, but most of the other rivers, they're sampling in the spring. And so it's, age 2 is a safe bet. 2-year-old fish is when they start showing up in our sampling. So it takes a couple of years for us to detect, a change in the fishery, whether it's from the dam failure or a drought or a really good water year.
Sure. So for those of you guys who don't know, a few years ago, the dam, there's basically a faulty part or something, and it choked the river down a bunch, and it was in November, right?
Yeah.
And that's pretty much brown trout spawn. So there's some concern about that age class. Have you guys found anything?
Yeah, so we're keeping an eye on things. The kind of tough part is we didn't have any data, sampling data, fisheries data between the lakes. So
Gotcha.
You got Hebgen, the dam busted. You got a couple mile stretch of river down till you hit Quake Lake, and then below Quake you go through the walkway and then you hit our long-term Pine Butte section.
Yeah.
So it's probably 10 to 15 miles downstream before you hit our first long-term reach. And so obviously we'll continue to do that. We have started sampling between the lakes. We're doing some red counts in the fall to keep an eye on brown trout spawning up there. And then initially after the the following year, because brown trout, like you said, they spawn in the fall, but the eggs sit in the gravel all winter until they hatch out the following spring. And then we went out that summer and did some juvenile sampling, just to kind of get a feel for, and I think provide a little assurance to folks that we still had a decent age class of browns from that year, and which is essentially what we found. And we dodged a bullet. There were some disconnected side channels, but most of them stayed moist. It wasn't too cold to where the eggs froze, so I think a lot of those side channels, even though they were dewatered or disconnected for a couple days, the eggs stayed wet enough to where we had some viable eggs even in those
That's
side
wild.
channels.
They
And
can
so-
be out of the water like that?
Yeah. Could have been a lot worse, but we're gonna keep an eye on things up there for another 3 or 4 years unless we see anything that causes some concern. We'll continue, but I think we dodged a bullet. Nothing kind of to the population level effect. Fish have 3 pairs of bones in their head. And quiz you. What are they called?
Dude, I have no idea.
Come
I feel like
on.
you've told me these.
I know, a dozen times. Pay attention.
Is it the, I know otolith.
There you go. Yep. All right. So fish have 3 pairs of bones in their head called otoliths. They're essentially their inner ear. They can use it to detect vibrations. They use it for balance. But the really cool thing is that they grow similar to a tree in that they have annual. Ooh.
That was a bump.
They have annuli, so we can use it to age the fish. The unfortunate part is it's in the middle of their head, so we have to kill them to get it.
You gotta put them down.
Yeah, but we selectively use it on rare occasions. It gives us a lot of good information on age and growth. The bone grows in proportion to the fish, so we can back calculate how old or how long a fish was at each annulus.
Oh, nice.
And then the really neat thing is that as that bone's growing, it picks up some of the metals that occur naturally in the water around it, strontium, barium, some other stuff that just come off the rocks
Yeah.
in the watershed. And once those metals are incorporated into the bone, the composition never changes. Our bones are going to reflect that garbage donut I had for breakfast,
Yeah.
the Coke, the beer I might drink here shortly. Whereas this otolith, once that material's laid down, it never changes. And so if we've got enough variability between, say, the Madison and some of these tributaries coming out of the mountains, and some of those metals, I can take that bone, toss it in a spectrometer, and look at the variation in those metals from the core to the edge of the otolith and recreate the life of the fish. So I can tell you where that fish was born, where it moved throughout its life, how many times it might have moved into a tributary, how long it's been in a tributary before it came out to the main stem. And so what we've learned in the Madison, at least, is that certain sections of the river, we're getting over half of our fish from tributaries.
Wow.
Downstream of here, there's quite a few big spring creeks and larger tributaries pouring out of the mountains, and we know those are important players in shaping what the main stem fishery looks like. And so it helps provide a little justification to spend some money away from the Madison on private land, way up in the Forest Service, to work on habitat improvements or water use, knowing that those improvements will translate to a better fishery down here. And so wrapping up that work here, but we're going to be doing similar stuff over in the Big Hole Beaverhead to see where those contributions, where those fish are coming from in the main stems.
Sweet. All right, boys, we're switching back. We got 2 on the board. 2 of the smallest fish
He got 2 on the
in
board.
the Madison. And now it's Mike's turn. I got this big net if you want to. Way to go, Mike. That's what you come here for. Dude, let's go.
Little buddy.
Hopper hock it.
Like it or not, most of the fish that we're fishing for right now are non-native.
Yeah.
Which is, there's nothing wrong with that. It's
No.
just kind of the new system that we're in. But to me, I get really intrigued and curious about the stuff up in the mountains and where we have native populations of cutthroat and a few little populations of Arctic grayling left. So what do you have in the works for that stuff?
This is actually a really cool stretch through here on the west side of the river. We've got a handful of cutthroat populations that we're actively trying to conserve and secure from hybridization with rainbows. So working on maintaining those and increasing the area where they're at, not too far upstream of here in Hebgen. We're trying to get a population grayling reestablished in some of the tributaries up there, working with the Park Service on some of those efforts up in the park. Just over the hill here, we've got a couple of the last indigenous populations in the lower 48 in the Centennial and Big Hole that are facing a variety of threats, one of which being water. Trying to figure out how we can keep water in the Big Hole, improve conditions for grayling in upper Red Rock Lake in the winter to keep those fish around. We're down to probably 70 to 80 fish in the Centennial, so trying to figure out ways to expand that population and give them a fighting chance. So it's a really cool area, a lot of work going on outside the fishery, and then we've got an active group working to improve the Madison. It's still a great fishery, but there's always room for improvement. So we can chip away at improving spawning and rearing habitat and work on the reservoirs to get those fisheries, keep those fish going as well. So a lot of cool stuff that you can get involved with. There's some groups in the valley here that are actively working with us and partnering on a lot of these projects. So if you're on the Madison or the Blackfoot or down on the Colorado, wherever, there's always a group nearby that you can help get out and if you're interested in helping out with sampling or working on habitat projects, getting willows going like we're seeing along the banks here, there's always a need. So do a little research and figure out who's doing good work in your area and get involved.
Well, we're kind of wrapping up here. We got probably a quarter mile to the boat ramp, and it's been a pretty good day. I mean, we didn't get skunked, which is always nice. Got a few on a hopper. Marcus had the hot hands today. Mike caught a couple on a dry. It was pretty sweet. But yeah, so if you're a common folk and you want to stay involved, we got any tips for the people at home that if they got opinions or have questions or what have you?
Yeah, no, I think it's just stay involved, or if you haven't been in the past, to get involved. The regs package and public comment period for our statewide management plan will probably have come and gone by the time this gets aired, but we're going to be updating the management plan every 4 years. We're going to have another opportunity for more proposed angling regulations coming up next year. If you live in a town like Bozeman or Big Sky, Missoula, there's a lot of folks moving out, a lot of building going on, and biologists in the area get the opportunity, both fisheries and wildlife, to comment on any proposed development, subdivisions, most anything that goes on with the counties or cities. But we're able to move the needle a little bit one way or another on things, but it's important for you to get involved in your community, whether it's the commission or with your local biologist, and help move the needle whatever direction you think things should go. If we don't hear from folks, and it's hard for us to to know where we want to go, especially with some of these recreational fisheries, whether folks are happy or not. We get out there with creel surveys and get out as much as we can and talk to folks. But I think just stay involved. I know it can be frustrating in time, and folks have voiced the concern that they're not being heard, but just try to stay involved as much as you can, and work with your local folks, whether it's your local FWP biologist or commission, to get things done. There's always work to do. So.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. Thanks for coming out today. It's been a fun float. Wish the fishing was a tad bit better, but you can't complain.
You can
it's beautiful.
Complain to the biologist.
Yeah.